The advancement of artificial eyes has come a very long way since first developed. They're virtually undetectable and very customizable. In this episode of OCuTALK, board-certified ocularist Hillary Yeager-Davis will be discussing all things ocular prosthetics, including what an ocularist does, the options available, and the maintenance routine required. Hillary?
I want to talk to you.
Not now, later.
No, now.
My name's Nick, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Please welcome Dr. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for a brand new episode of OCuTALK. My name's Nick, and today we have a very special guest joining us. Everyone, please welcome board-certified ocularist Hillary Yeager. Hillary, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi there. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're very excited to have you here. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to visit with us. Hillary, before we get going, could you please let us know a little bit about your background and your specialty to our viewers?
Sure. So I'm an ocularist. I'm board certified. Ocularists are people that fabricate and fit ocular prosthetics or artificial eyes. My background, actually, I went to school for dental assisting, which was kind of a different track. But then after finishing up school, I transitioned over to this, and that was 11 years ago. So our business has been a family-run business since the 70s. My dad's been a board-certified ocularist since then, and he's semi-retired now, but we established Yeager Ocular Prosthetics in 2020 for both of us, and then, the world fell apart, and he's just been kind of semi-retired since. So it's been a very rewarding career and something that I've always been kind of brought up around. Not necessarily something I had planned on doing by any means. I watched my mom pull her hair out with dealing with insurance all the time, and I wanted nothing to do with that. I always enjoyed working with patients, and obviously going into the dental avenue, I wanted to help people, but I ended up transitioning to this and haven't looked back since.
Well, that's a fascinating transition from dental hygiene to now Ocularis, but thank you for that introduction. That was amazing. You explained it a little bit in your introduction about Ocularis, but for those who don't know anything about it or haven't seen anything about Ocularis before, what is an Ocularis and what does an Ocularis do exactly?
Sure. So we fit patients that have lost an eye or have been born with small globes. We fit them with either an artificial eye or a scleral shell. And really the biggest difference between the two is there a globe back behind there, or is there an implant? And that kind of differentiates between the two. But we do everything in-house by hand in our own lab, and most people do. I would say that Ocularis, it's a very common thing to have generational businesses. There's quite a few of us that have been brought up within it, even second, third generation ocular. So it's a lot of us know each other. It's kind of a big extended family.
Well, absolutely. That's amazing. And I know you talked about it again a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to ask, you said you wanted to help people a lot, but what made you want to become an ocularist?
That's a really good question. I think just having been exposed to it and seeing the impact that you can make on someone's life in 2 days. It takes us 2 days to make an artificial eye for someone, and in circumstances that they never thought they'd find themselves in. So it's always been a huge dose of perspective for myself to keep the little things, and big things, because we're constantly around people that are going through the unimaginable. And to be able to turn around and give them back a part of themselves that they lost suddenly or lost to cancer or something along those lines, it's extremely rewarding. And, when you're brought up in a family business, I don't know as if there's ever like a day where you're like, I'm going to do it, because there's always kind of a love-hate relationship, I think, with family businesses because you've been around it for so long. But I really, truly wouldn't have it any other way. It's, everybody's like, was this what you were meant to do? And I really feel like I found what I was meant to do, which is great.
Well, that is an amazing story, and thank you for sharing that with us. And so, what is the process like to become an ocularist? Like, what is that education process like for you and for all the other ocularists?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say there's really two main tracks to becoming an ocularist. Either you have someone over you that's training you, which we refer to as the apprenticeship route, or you've kind of gone at it your own and trained yourself. And that's more of like the associate, what had been referred to as the associate route. All in all, you can't do it faster than 5 years. Either with the American Society of Ocularistry, they have their own program that's kind of like a guided apprenticeship. All of it culminates with your national examination board, which is actually headquarters in our office. I'm the administrator for the NEBO, is what we call it, the National Examining Board of Ocularists. So we have a 150 question written exam, and then we have a 2-part fabrication exam where the ocularist has to make a scleral shell and a conventional prosthesis duplicate of what is sent to them, and then it's all graded and critiqued. So it's a very intricate process to become a board certified ocularist, but it is a minimum competency exam that has become far more widespread as far as accepted with insurance and Medicare or Medicaid, all that sort of thing.
Hillary, are there certain cases that you see more often than others? And is there a leading cause for someone to lose their eye?
That's a really good question, and one that's kind of tricky to answer. I would say there's 3 general reasons why you have eye loss, and that's kind of where the ocular octopus comes in with the different colors that we have. So our mint, the original guy that we have here, the mint color is the I was born this way, and those are conditions like microphthalmia and ophthalmia, where a child's born with maybe a small globe. So that's one category, and that's not necessarily eye loss, but they don't have vision in that side, and we're trying to encourage growth of the orbits and the brain and all of that. So we've got the congenital side of things. Then we have kind of that accident or fluke, wrong place, wrong time. That's the purple octopus. And then we have the yellow, which is the know the glow concept of more of the acquired diseases, retinoblastoma, malignant melanoma. And those, I would say, tend to ebb and flow in how often we see them. You know, we'll go through a period of time where we'll see a lot of ocular melanoma, and then that will kind of quiet down a little bit, and then we'll see a lot of cases of microphthalmia. So it's kind of widespread, and I will say modern medicine has saved so many more eyes than we have in the past, which is amazing. That's kind of the whole goal of the thing, is making progress so more people can keep their eyes. But unfortunately, we're still needed in some circumstances, you know, those fluke circumstances, wrong place, wrong time, accidents, you know, stuff you can't avoid. But tough question to answer, because I know countrywide it kind of changes also depending on your region, but it ebbs and flows in those kind of 3 categories just a little bit.
Well, thank you for that information, Hillary. And actually, follow-up question: the octopus. Where did you come up with the idea to create the octopus from?
Sure. So this little guy was a product of a very cold winter of 2018 when we were stuck inside for a long time. It was right after I had become board certified, and I had wanted to have some sort of realistic something that was cuter than most diagrams and easier for people to look at. I would say the trickiest part of any eye loss case is having the patient manipulate an area that they're not used to manipulating. So if we can teach them the concepts and the technique on this guy, then when it comes to doing it for themselves, they're far more comfortable and confident. So this whole process has been a big learning curve, from making them all ourselves to finding a manufacturer to the development of the 3 colors and the book and everything. And it's been a wonderful way to have some really tough conversations with people about, you know, stuff that they didn't expect to come across in their lifetime.
Well, that definitely is amazing, and that is a very cool thing that you created there. So thank you for sharing that with us. So how many patients do you typically see on average, and how often do they need to follow up with you for visits?
Sure, absolutely. We kind of think of a prosthesis like cleaning our teeth. We'd like to have that done at least once a year to get a good deep clean on the eye. Removes all that protein that kind of gets adhered to it that's like bugs on your windshield in July. It really tears up your windshield wipers. So we like to get that all cleaned off. So that's at least our once a year appointment. And then when it comes to the actual making of the eye and possibly replacing it, it's every 5 to 7 years with possibly a tune-up in there somewhere. So the prosthesis, one hard fixed piece, that's not going to change, but the body does a whole heck of a lot. So gravity, skin laxity, all that sort of thing plays a big part. And if they've worn a prosthesis longer, then we have even more gravity, laxity, all that stuff that plays in. But 5 to 7 years is the rule of thumb with replacement. But I have had some patients that have gone 20, 25 years with an eye that's fit really well, minor color changes, and they've done just fine. So it is very patient dependent and circumstance dependent. If they've gone through an accident where they've had a lot more trauma, then we'll see a lot more changes on the back end. So that once a year appointment keeps us nice and in tune with those little changes versus seeing them once every 5 years. And then we have this whole handful of things that we have to try and update.
Well, gotcha. Well, excellent information. And you actually answered one of my questions. So every 5 to 7 years is typically how long one would last. So one other question I did have, what are like the current options that are available for artificial eyes right now?
Sure. A lot of people refer to them still as glass eyes, even though they have been plastic since World War II. Um, Even patients that know that they're plastic still say, my glass eye this, my glass eye that. And plastic, I would say the PMMA, polymethyl methacrylate, is still the number one preferred option. It has the best track record, I guess, as far as materials go. They've tried things like silicone and other slightly more porous materials, but they seem to cause a little bit more mattering and issues within the socket. At one particular point, I think they were doing some other plastic derivative materials, but we still somehow end up back to this PMMA that we can process in office and easily add to and manipulate with low issues of ventilation and other caustic chemicals.
Well, thank you for that information, Hillary. Appreciate that. And what about like common eye conditions like dry eye? Like, how does that impact the prosthetic? Does it impact the prosthetic eye at all? And does it place much pressure? I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, does that make the regular eye put a lot more pressure on it to like kind of see, since if I have any dry eyes in my prosthetic?
Good question. Dry eyes absolutely impact people that wear an artificial eye. We have our standard information that we think of when we think of dry eyes. We want to blink more. Are you having too much screen time, diet changes, other weird autoimmune conditions? But all of that kind of goes out the window as soon as we put a hunk of plastic in there and then expect the lid to blink over it all the time. So typically when it comes to determining if someone has dry eye that we need to go at a little bit more aggressively is once we get a prosthesis completed, we like to just see what their baseline of tears is before we start adding something in there. Common symptoms of dry, the burning, itching, stinging, foreign body sensation, all of those still apply. More so to the upper eyelid. And that's where all of our sensation of dry eye is going to come from for our patients, because there's no cornea to give any of the stimulation to the rest of that structure there. So it's all about the upper eyelid. So when we have a patient come in for a check and polish, one of the things that we'll check for, we'll take the eye out, get it cleaning. And then when we look in the socket, we want to make sure that the implant's always covered or the globe's nice and calm. And then we'll evert the eyelids and see just how red and irritated those margins are. And more times than not, I would say in a scale of like 1 to 10 of redness, 1 being that kind of peachy coral, 10 being almost bleeding, they're always kind of in that 4 to 5 range where things are just on the inflamed side, which means we're probably getting some meibomian gland reduction. That little gland at the top is not allowing things to let that oil come out. So That's why we like the Retain so much, is it's such a great supplement to that lipid layer. And 9 times out of 10, that's what a prosthetic eye wearing patient is missing. So we'll start with that if we find that they're always burning, itchy, kind of a slow drag blink over that prosthesis, and then kind of go from there if we need to get them more aggressive with like the coconut oil and that sort of thing.
Well, we definitely appreciate the shout out there, Hillary. Thank you so much. And so we talked about a prosthetic, you can cause dry eye. Have you ever had a case to where a prosthetic has caused like an allergic reaction? And if like so, like what did you do about it?
That's a good question, and something that we discuss quite heavily at NEBO as we develop the exam and more of that information. We really have to evaluate, is it the actual material or was it a poor processing of that material? So if the polymer isn't processed correctly, you end up with a bunch of free-floating monomers, and monomers like dumping nail polish in your socket. Of course, that's going to cause some problems. So if the plastic is processed correctly, you won't have any of that free-floating monomer. I think on record, there's maybe 1 or 2 patients that have actually had a true allergic reaction to the PMMA. And it's so hard to determine if there was any of that free-floating monomer, because the PMMA also absorbs a little bit of the moisture by volume. So if your tears, makeup, eye drops, eye makeup remover, any of those things that can kind of harbor into that plastic, those could cause some of the problems too. So it's kind of a tricky thing, dog chasing its tail, of finding out what the actual root of the problem was. But an actual true allergic reaction to the plastic is very rare.
Very interesting information there, and that was very vivid. I got everything you were saying there, but thank you for that information. And so, what is the cleaning process like for all of this, and what type of routine do you usually recommend for your patients?
Sure. We recommend a patient actually leave their prosthesis in and alone and treat it externally to start with. If they feel like they have an eyelash, a little piece of dirt back behind it, then we just recommend they take it out and use simple soap and water to clean it. And then lots and lots of water afterwards, because if there's soap residue when you put it back in, you'll know, and it'll sting a little bit. But that's all we recommend. I've had patients clean it with all sorts of things that I would rather them not, between toothpaste, Drano, all of the things. Alcohol is definitely a no-no. It cracks the surface. But all of the things, just simple soap and water. That's all it has to be. And then come see us once a year and we'll make sure it's all nice and shiny.
Wow, I couldn't imagine cleaning it with anything else other than soap and water. Now that sounds terrible.
Oh, it's bad. The toothpaste one that came back in, you could see every little line of the bristle that had tore apart from the abrasive toothpaste. It was
Oh
bad.
man.
And they had tried to put it back in too. Of course, they had lots of issues. So lots of mattering.
Well, definitely sounds like a fun time over there with that one. But thank you for that information, Hillary. And so we talked about the cleaning process for the prosthetic, but does eyelid hygiene play a part in any of this? And if so, how so?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We talked about those meibomian glands getting blocked so easily, either from inflammation. Blepharitis is definitely a big thing with our patients. And it had been for a while that the type of cleaning and routine that I would suggest for them would all be dependent upon their type of hygiene and kind of where they were at level wise. You don't want to give somebody that can barely take a shower once a week this big extensive cleaning process, because they're not going to follow through with it. So best product ever is the OcuSoft Lid Scrubs Plus. Love those. I hand them to almost every single patient walking out the door and say, get a box of these to have on hand. Especially for the prosthetic eye wearers. They're always like, I feel like I get a kind of a mucusy line right across the prosthesis. Sometimes they won't close all the way at night. And then to remove it, they're like, I'll either take my fingernail and try and scratch it off. And I'm like, oh, let's not do that. So the lid scrubs in the Plus formula, where you don't have to rinse it off afterwards, they can gently do the circles with that little bit of soft abrasion on that towel and then throw it away. And then we don't have to worry about the whole perpetuating of bacteria and all that sort of thing. So absolutely the best product ever. And prior to that, we had been suggesting the baby shampoo route, which is still a great option, for cost effective travel. Some areas you can't get the lid scrubs, still a great option. But, when you have something that's more formulated for those lids, it's even that much better. But lid hygiene, absolutely. Um, and then we have patients that wear a lot of makeup. I always tell them how it goes on is just as important as how it comes off. If it looks really fabulous on, but you still have just that black line of stuff and you've got goopy gunkiness at the base of your eyelashes, you're always going to have perpetual mattering and goopy gunkiness, especially with the prosthesis. So makeup has to be a little bit reevaluated with prosthetic patients. Um, Sometimes it's just a brand change, going to something hypoallergenic. It's always a little bit of trial and error with that one, but taking it off is always more important, I think, than how it goes on, especially every day. Don't
Well,
skip.
Absolutely. You're definitely right about that. And that was fantastic information. And again, thank you for the shout out. And so I want to leave you with this last question. And I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but I actually wanted to ask you, could you let us know about one of your most inspirational cases?
That is such a tricky question because every single case is circumstances that they have to overcome and work through. And to be exposed to that on a routine basis, it's life changing. I mean, it certainly puts your own life into perspective. Like we said earlier, you keep little things, and big things, big things. Um, but she's actually the inspiration for the purple octopus. Jessica has become a really great friend, and then she said I could share this with you, so that's okay. She was at a concert and locally, and was not usually from this area, and a e-cigarette was thrown and it blew up. And where she was normally, going to have a really great, fabulous time, turned into these horrible circumstances. And um, that's how we met. And she every year on the anniversary of the eye loss, they have this big party and have all the foods look like eyes of different kinds, like the platters and all this stuff. And she's turned this unfortunate, awful thing into such a community building type of thing, and is just her outlook on life is amazing. She is someone to look up to for sure.
Well, that is definitely an inspirational story, and we again thank you for all the work that you do for everyone out there, and everyone that was board certified Ocularis Hillary Yeager. Hillary, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a huge honor. Much appreciated.